The year was 1992, and Ghana stood on the precipice of a monumental change. The country, long marked by cycles of military coups and political unrest, was on the verge of re entering the fold of democratic governance. At the heart of this transformation was Jerry John Rawlings, a charismatic and controversial figure who had come to power twice through military coups. In 1979 and again in 1981, his journey from a fiery young Air Force officer to a self-proclaimed revolutionary leader and ultimately the architect of a democratic transition is a story of political acumen, shifting ideologies, and a strategic vision. When Rawlings seized power in 1981 through the Provisional National Defense Council, Ghana was reeling from economic hardships and political instability. He positioned himself as a populist reformer, railing against corruption and economic mismanagement. While his early years in power were marked by stringent policies and a socialist-leaning agenda, by the mid to late 1980s, Rawlings began shifting toward economic liberalization and international cooperation. His alignment with the IMF and World Bank to implement structural adjustment programs earned him praise for stabilizing Ghana's economy, but also criticism for the social costs that it entailed. By the early 1990s, however, the global political climate was changing. The Cold War was over, and a wave of democratization was sweeping through Africa. Autocratic regimes were under pressure to embrace democratic reforms. In Ghana, internal demand for political pluralism was mounting, with civil society groups, religious bodies, and student movements calling for change. Rawlings, acutely aware of the shifting winds, began preparing for a carefully orchestrated return to constitutional rule, but on his terms. Rawlings understood that a democratic transition was inevitable, but he was determined not to cede control of the process. In 1991, he established a committee of experts, which was tasked with drafting a new constitution. This move was widely seen as a way to shape the country's political future in a way that will safeguard the interest of the PNDC and ensure a prominent role for Rawlings in the post-transition government. The draft constitution laid the groundwork for multi-party elections and established key democratic institutions such as an independent electoral commission. The referendum on the constitution in April 1992 passed with overwhelming support, signaling the populace readiness for democratic governance. For Rawlings, this was a calculated victory. He now had a roadmap to democracy that bore his stamp, and he wasted no time positioning himself and his allies to retain power in the new dispensation. In May 1992, Rawlings transformed his political machinery, the PNDC, into a new political party, the National Democratic Congress. The NDC was a carefully constructed coalition that included old PNDC loyalists, technocrats, and elements of the business community who had benefited from the economic reforms of the 1980s. By leading the NDC, Rawlings ensured that his legacy and influence would continue under a civilian guise. Rawlings' campaign strategy for the November 1992 elections was multifaceted. He traveled extensively across Ghana, drawing on his populist roots and charisma to connect with rural voters and present himself as the champion of the ordinary Ghanaian. His message was one of continuity and progress, emphasizing his government's economic achievement and stability while painting opposition figures as inexperienced and disconnected from the realities of governance. At the same time, Rawlings leveraged state resources to the NDC's advantage. Opposition parties complained of an uneven playing field, alleging that the state media favored Rawlings and that public funds were used to support NDC activities. Nonetheless, Rawlings' grip on power and his ability to mobilize grassroots support proved formidable. The leader to the elections was not without controversy. Opposition parties led by the New Patriotic Party and its candidate, Professor Albert Edubuahin, accused Rawlings and the NDC of manipulating the voter registration process and intimidating political opponents. There were also concerns about media access and freedom of expression, as state-owned media heavily favored the ruling party. Despite these challenges, Rawlings pressed forward, portraying himself as the only leader capable of maintaining stability in a country that had known little peace in previous decades. He deftly used his incumbency to solidify his standard, but he also made symbolic gestures toward fairness and democracy, such as inviting in international observers to monitor the elections. This move, which lent legitimacy to the process, was seen by many as a masterstroke in consolidating his image both domestically and abroad. On November 3, 1992, Ghanaians went to the polls in what will become a historic vote. Rawlings won the presidency with approximately 58% of the votes, defeating Eduboahen. The opposition decried irregularities and alleged widespread electoral fraud, leading them to boycott the subsequent parliamentary elections. Nevertheless, the elections marked Ghana's transition from military rule to democratic governance, with Rawlings as its first democratically elected leader under the new constitution. In the aftermath, Rawlings sought to present himself as a Democrat committed to reform. His government worked to implement constitutional provisions such as the decentralization and greater press freedom, though these were not without limits. Over time, Rawlings' leadership style softened and he became a pivotal figure in Ghana's democratic development. John Rawlings' role in the 1992 elections was both celebrated and criticized. He masterminded a complex transition that secured his place at the forefront of Ghana's political landscape, while navigating the demands of democratization. Though his methods and motivations were debated, there is no denying his impact on Ghana's path to democratic rule. For many, his legacy is one of transformation, from a military leader to democratically elected president who shaped Ghana's modern political identity.